I am 117 years old. Most mornings, I wake up surprised that I am still here. Not frightened, just surprised. The light comes through the curtains the same way it did when I was a little girl in 1918. But everyone who once stood in that light with me is gone. That is the first truth about living this long. You do not outlive death. You outlive people. At 117, your body is thin and careful. Your hands tremble when you lift a teacup. Your hearing fades in and out like an old radio. But it isn't the body that makes longevity heavy. It's memory. Memory keeps growing even when everything else shrinks. People ask me what the secret is. They expect something tidy, a certain food, a habit, a miracle. I always disappoint them. Longevity is not a trick. It is endurance. I was born when horses still outnumbered cars in my town. I grew up without electricity for the first few years. My mother hung laundry in the yard, and I held the clothespins in my small fist like treasure. I remember the smell of coal smoke and the sound of my father's boots on the porch. I thought life would be simple. Marriage, children, a steady kitchen table filled with noise. In my 20s, I married a quiet man with kind shoulders. He had steady work and gentle hands. We did not talk about feelings. People didn't then. We talked about bills, about weather, about who was sick in town. I believed love meant staying, and so I stayed. We had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. I can still see their faces when they were small, sticky with jam, arguing over nothing. Those were the loud years. I did not know they were the loud years. In my 30s, survival meant ration cards and sewing patches over patches. We learned to stretch soup and swallow fear. War came and went. Friends left and did not return. I learned how to fold grief small so it would fit inside a drawer and not spill onto the children. You do that when you are young. You postpone your sadness. You say, "I'll feel this later." Later is a dangerous word. In my 40s, my husband worked long hours. I worked longer ones at home. I believed exhaustion was proof of goodness. If I was tired, I must be doing something right. I missed small things. My daughter standing in the doorway wanting to talk while I scrubbed pots. My son asking me to watch him throw a ball while I folded laundry. I always said, "In a minute." I had so many minutes. I thought they would wait. They didn't. The years did not explode. They thinned out quietly. Children grow that way. One day they are small enough to lift. The next day they are taller than you, and their voices change, and you do not notice the exact moment it happened. In my 50s, the house grew quieter. My children left, one by one. I stood in their empty rooms longer than necessary. I told myself this was success. We had raised them well enough to leave. Success can feel like loss if you look at it too long. My husband and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table, two people who had built a life together, but had forgotten how to speak without noise around us. We were not unhappy. That is important. We were simply distant. Distance does not arrive loudly. It builds like dust on a shelf. Then came the first great tearing. My youngest son died at 42. A heart problem none of us saw coming. One phone call, one hospital room, one doctor speaking gently. A mother is not meant to bury her child. It rearranges something inside you that never returns to its proper place. I did not scream. I did not collapse. I folded the grief again, smaller this time, but it would not fit in the drawer anymore. It leaked. It followed me into the grocery store, into church, into sleep. My husband tried to be strong. That was his language. He carried it alone. And in carrying it alone, he walked further from me. He died 8 years later. Cancer, slow, humbling. I sat beside him while machines breathed louder than he did. After 56 years of marriage, I held his hand and realized there were things we had never said. Not because we didn't care, because we thought there would be more time. That is the second truth about longevity. Time does not announce its limits. In my 70s, I lived alone for the first time. The silence was physical. It pressed against my ears. I would turn on the radio just to hear another human voice, even if it wasn't speaking to me. Anxiety came then, a quiet, crawling thing. At night I would lie awake, counting breaths, wondering how many were left. When you are young, death feels theoretical. When you are old, it feels scheduled. I learned something in those years. Survival is not about avoiding pain. It is about making room for it. I began walking every morning, slowly, around the same block. I greeted the same trees. I watched seasons change. I let myself cry when I needed to, right there on the sidewalk if it came. People looked away politely. I forgave people I had held silent resentments toward for decades. Not because they apologized. Most of them were already gone. I forgave them because carrying anger at 80 is too heavy. Forgiveness is not dramatic. It is practical. In my 80s, I became the oldest person at every gathering. Weddings, funerals, birthdays. Children I once rocked now had gray hair. They called me amazing. They asked for stories about the old days. They did not see the cost. Longevity means watching generations pass like pages turning. Friends disappear one by one. Your phone rings less often. Your world becomes smaller, not because you want it to, but because there are fewer people left who remember when you were young. Memory becomes your closest companion. Sometimes it is kind, sometimes it is sharp. In my 90s, I fell in the kitchen and lay on the floor longer than I like to admit. I remember staring at the ceiling, thinking, so this is how it ends. I was not afraid. I was tired. But it did not end. A neighbor found me. Doctors stitched and patched. My body, stubborn as ever, continued. People celebrated my 100th birthday, like I had achieved something heroic. Balloons, cake, photographs. I smiled because they wanted me to. But inside, I understood something they did not. Living long is not an accomplishment in itself. It is an accumulation. You accumulate loss. You accumulate stories. You accumulate forgiveness. At 105, my best friend from childhood died. We had known each other for more than a century. Imagine that. 100 years of shared memory. When she left, a whole language left with her. There were jokes no one else understood. Names no one else remembered. I felt suddenly foreign in my own life. The turning point came at 110. I was sitting in a chair by the window, sunlight on my hands, when I realized I was no longer afraid of dying. Not because I was brave, because I had already practiced goodbye so many times. The fear that had followed me since my 70s dissolved quietly. I understood then that survival was never about clinging. It was about allowing people to leave, allowing yourself to change, allowing grief to sit beside you without demanding it leave. Now, at 117, my days are small. I wake, I wash slowly, I sit by the window, I listen to birds argue in the trees. Caregivers come and go, kind and efficient. I thank them. Sometimes I hold an old photograph of my son. I trace his face with my finger. I no longer ask why. There is no answer waiting. What can't be fixed is simple. I cannot go back and sit on the floor to play one more game with my daughter. I cannot tell my husband the things I saved for later. I cannot relive the ordinary Tuesdays I rushed through. You do not regret the big mistakes as much as you regret the small postponements. the dinners eaten in a hurry, the conversations shortened, the hugs given distractedly. I lived through pandemics, wars, inventions that would have sounded like magic in my childhood. I watched the world change its clothes over and over. But the human heart has not changed. It still wants to be seen. It still breaks the same way. People ask how I stayed mentally strong. I did not always. I had dark months. I had mornings when I did not want to get out of bed. Strength is not constant. It is a decision made repeatedly. Some days my only achievement was getting dressed. Some days it was calling someone instead of withdrawing. Some days it was simply breathing through a wave of memory without pushing it away. Purpose changes as you age. At 30, my purpose was raising children. At 60, it was caring for a sick husband. At 90, it was staying curious about the day ahead, even if that day held very little. Now, my purpose is smaller still. To be gentle with whoever walks into my room. To say thank you. To remember. If you are listening to me and you are young, I will not tell you to chase dreams or seize anything. I will only say this. Do not assume there will be more time for the people you love. Sit down when they ask you to sit. Look at them when they speak. Let the dishes wait sometimes. Success is warm for a moment. Presence stays in the bones. I have lived 117 years, and the truth is not glamorous. I survived because I adapted. I bent when life bent me. I let my heart break and mend and break again without hardening it completely. I ate simple food. I walked when I could. I forgave often. I let myself grieve instead of pretending I was untouched. And I kept going. There is gratitude in me, yes. I have seen great-grandchildren laugh. I have felt sunlight on my face for more than a century. That is not small. But there is sorrow, too. It sits beside the gratitude like an old friend. They do not fight anymore. They share the same chair. If this meant something to you, hold someone's hand a little longer tonight. Not because it will make you live to 117, but because one day, if you are lucky enough to live long, it is the feeling of that hand you will remember. I am 117 years old, and I am still here, quietly.